Okay, welcome to part 2 of the Introduction to Visual Literacy. So if we go into a different genre and we talk about simply instructional images, so ones we use in instruction, we've got 5 different types here. So we've got decorative visuals, representative visuals, organizational visuals, interpretive and transformational visuals. So decorative visuals do what we say. We kind of jazz it up. Once upon a time, the stock was, every 3 slides. If you're using some kind of slide presentation software like PowerPoint or Google Slides, every third slide you were supposed to have some kind of visual just to, again, bring the attention back. So you see how this overlaps with the first one, right? We talk about decorative visuals and creating attention. The only problem is when we select a decorative visual, it really needs to be congruent with the content that's on the page. So for instance, this green arrow doesn't make much sense because, if I'm that kid in the class that struggles with attention, and I am that kid, I would look at the arrow and then I'd look over and realize that the puzzle pieces are there and say, I wonder if those fit together. And then I try to figure out which ones fit together. So, and which really loses me from the content at that point. Representative visuals, they represent, well, they're used to make information more concrete. They're used to convey information quickly and easily. So the idea is they're an overview of the concept, right? That's what really we'll talk about. They represent a concept. So in this case, when we're talking about mixing colors, and I'm sure all of you have done this in the past, mixing those colors together gives us other colors, right? So that's representative in this visual. It's represented as that process. Organizational visuals help learners understand the structure, sequence, and hierarchy of information and help integrate that information. So things like charts, graphs, help people see relationships between elements, and they're considered to be organizational visuals. So something like this is an organizational visual. So what I talked to you about before, in terms of the branches of government, this is what that would look like. Now imagine this being presented to students compared to, say, 3 different chapters on each branch. Obviously, that's going to help them because it's multiple sensory inputs, right? They're seeing it as well as having just read the written text. So this allows them to peg into contextual learning, so learning within a context when they see the whole thing. Interpretive visuals help learners understand difficult and ambiguous content. In general, they help make information more comprehensible. So examples include models of systems and diagrams of processes. This is interpretive in nature. So at one point in time, you made a very large cognitive jump. You made the jump from these 2 fingers or these 2 dots equal this crazy squiggly line that represents a 2, okay? Or that we call a 2. So that type of abstraction, right, being able to deal with that type of abstraction of the squiggly line equals 2 physical things, that was a cognitive leap. So by presenting stimulus like this over and over again, right, it allows the students to actually interpret from one concept to being another, right? So that's why it's an interpretive visual. Transformative visuals take it to a different level. Okay, they make information more memorable. So a transformative visual focuses more on helping the learner understand than on presenting the content. Transformative visuals affect long-term memory because they rely on analogy or previous experiences stored in memory as devices to help people learn. So this is what's called touch math. So if for the first 6 months of school, students see these over and over again as we show them what numbers represent, then take it away, they'll still be able to count the black dots, which you touch 1 time, and the red dots, which you touch twice, to count the values, even though they're no longer presented, because it's part of their memory lexicon, right? So every time they see that number, they realize where those points are. And that, okay, on to visual communication, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So what we have in education is traditionally what's described as a technocentric design, because imagine, if you will, Word, Microsoft Word. You have a lot of features, so you can do drop shadows, you can do word art, you can insert images, you can insert borders and shading, etc., etc., etc. Okay, Problem is when people use them all at the same time. And then it just becomes what's known in Portuguese as bagunça. So it becomes a big mess. And it's not good. It doesn't drive function in terms of being able to decode what material is important and what is perhaps less important or superfluous. Edge-adjunct is the term that they have for us in the industry. So we're characterized by the overuse of clip art, borders, shading, all capitalized text, which in a text-based society is now shouting, all centered text, which is poetry, and word art. So I'm going to give you some strategies today. So this is called the color wheel. And I'm going to give you a very simple strategy, two simple strategies to choose colors. We can choose a slice of the pie. Okay, so we can choose any of those blues that are highlighted. So one could be the text body and the other one could actually be a heading level. Okay, or we could choose across the color wheel. Okay, that denotes a little more pageantry, a little more difference. Okay, so not like content, but different content. Okay, so for instance, if I look at, say, Ashland University's color choice, well, it's purple and gold, right? So that's like across the color wheel. If I look at Bowling Green's choice of school colors, we have brown and orange, right? So they're within the same slice of pie. You get the idea. I'm also going to give you a best practice in terms of models of doing stuff. Okay, so in this case it's layout. So we're going to use a CARP model, CARP, for contrast, alignment, repetition, and proximity. So contrast, we can use a lot of different features to create contrast. So in this case we've got bold and we've got a percentage grayscale for the con, right? To show difference, right? We want to show difference. So with bold headings, to show that it's a heading, not part of the text body, etc. So that's the idea of contrast. Highest contrast to the human eye is white text on a black background. All right, so that's most accessible in terms of contrast. If we talk about alignment and fonts, we can align stuff around the edges of a particular box or caption or box or image, right? It makes sense. Usually in newspapers it falls below. When we run into problems is if, for instance, when we use it within a box, that the contrast, going back one slide, isn't as good as we had hoped it would be. So we don't actually see the text pop, it becomes difficult to recognize characters, etc. Get into trouble when we do stuff like this. So there's two issues with this. Try to guess what they are. I'll give you 10 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Alright, so problem number one is the fact that it's offset. So type can be aligned, is pushed too far right, and along the lines of a shape is far left. Since we read in English left to right, our eye is going and our mind is going to draw us to along the lines of the shape because that's flush left. It must be the first thing that we read. Okay, that's one thing. The other thing is the characters are actually obscured by the gray line in the background. So if I have a student with a learning disability that's text-based, so they have a hard time figuring out what the characters are, or well, we'll leave it at that, figuring out what the characters are. And the same thing can be said for those with low vision, so they're also going to have a hard time understanding what the characters are, but it's a different reason why. So then we have a problem. We've created a barrier rather than facilitated them getting that information. That's really what we're talking about, right? Because anytime we do instruction, we're trying to get information out. Anytime we put text or visuals up, we're trying to get information encoded into memory, memorized, so students can internalize that and perhaps use that skill for something else. Best practices. So type can be repeated, so this is the whole repetition idea. To create harmony, the boxes seem to relate because large letters and colors are repeated. So what were the letters and what were the words in the boxes on the previous slide? Try to recall. All right, so sports, basketball, soccer, football. We have repetition of the big letters at the beginning. We have repetition of the colors. We have repetition, which makes it a cohesive whole, right? The idea is people are going to understand that it's a unit or hierarchy or definition of something by doing that. The linkages together also are repeated. So you make that repetition to make something look cohesive, right? To make it look like it all belongs together, and that's going to help students cognitively encode that into memory. So another best practice, so if that was R, then this is P, so this is proximity. So type can be in close proximity to show relationships. Type can be far apart to show difference. On the left side now. This sentence and the sentence below it look like they belong together. This sentence looks like it belongs to the sentence above, even though it's in a different typeface. So because they're together proximity-wise, even though they're a different font, we're going to read them as a whole because that's it. They're blocked together. Proximity, they're close. That means they must be like, they must be similar, they must be related. Typeface that is far apart, cognitive block, space, figuring out where I need to go, seems unrelated, even though this sentence is in the same typeface as a top sentence. It still seems unrelated. Okay, so let's look at CARP in a different manner slightly. Contrast. Students learn better when extraneous material is excluded rather than included. In other words, focus on what's important by removing what's not important. The frogs become a distraction in this place. This is not a good thing. So the contrast from the content to the visual, the decorative visual that's being used, is bad. So we want, again, similar content and visuals paired together. Alignment. So research on chunking is indirectly related to alignment because aligning items tends to group items perceptually. Thus, what may be considered several distinct elements is instead perceived as one element. In other words, a new schema may be created by a chunk, which becomes a basic for expanding memory, or the ability to reduce cognitive load. All right, so the idea is if I'm writing on the board and I write in one column about snakes, and then I go, hey, let's talk about frogs, and I start in the next column writing about frogs on the board, and then I say, hey, I forgot something about snakes, and then write that on the other side of frogs. As I work my way from left to right across the board, it's going to be a problem. I've created frogs as a barrier, right, because the information is not perceptually chunked together. Okay, we do the same thing in textbooks. It's not like we'll do one type of math and then go on to another type of math and then go back to the first type of math. We try to chunk them together, right, so they're all cohesive. And that's important in a process. It's important also when we lecture. If we go off topic, off basis, over and over again and stray, that actually creates a cognitive block. It helps increase cognitive load, which is a bad thing. Repetition. So rehearsal is the act of repeating information in memory and can significantly increase retention. So repeating things like colors, lines, shapes, depth, space, etc. helps us encode them into memory. All right. Unless we're rehearsing things, unless we're taking things out of the filing cabinet memory-wise, pulling out that folder where the memory exists and looking at it, it will get lost. So if you've ever walked away for 2 weeks and not use your ATM PIN number and come back and don't know what it is, or a locker combination, etc., it's that. It's because it hasn't been recalled within that time period and the memory's gone lost. Proximity. Students learn better when corresponding words and pictures are presented near rather than far apart from each other. So something as simple as saying, anytime that there's a picture, we put the caption underneath the picture, not on the other side of the page or down in the bottom right corner of a page, which I've seen done in layout before. So there you have it. It's kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly of what people do in terms of design. So use it well and use it through the rest of the course.